And now I'm here, and we need to set up. I told Guru Nishta we would be starting later, 15 minutes later, so I'll just see. I don't know if she got that message or not. But if she did get the message, then that's fine. Krishna Govinda Hari Murari He Nath Bhajavasudeva. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Dvaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare Gauranga Nityananda. Hold on. Everyone hold on. I just got back. So I just have to set a few things up. Think of your questions we had from yesterday's class. We're going to continue that. I just want to plug in my tape recorder, digital recorder. We just went to downtown Berlin. Take my daughter to some museums, and they're still down there, and I just ran back, and I literally just got here on time. So I'm not entirely set up, so just give me a moment. And I want to tell you something I heard this morning. It was quite interesting. But just give me a moment. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. So yesterday, on the request of Yamini, we had talked about how focusing on values helps us in controlling emotions. And one of the things that I had said, which I thought was very important, is that if you strengthen your values, your values become more of how you, they become more, I'm going to get this right. Hold on a second. The world is not perfect. I'm trying to make it perfect. Okay. The problem with it not being perfect is there's this bright light just shining in my face. Anyway, it's the best I can do, ladies and gentlemen. So, we had spoken about the, actually I had taken notes on something that I had read this morning. And it looks like my computer decided to restart, and I don't have it. Anyway, that was interesting, isn't it? Computers are interesting the way they have minds of their own, aren't they? I had left and yeah, anyway, so I was making the point at the end of the last class, or during the class, I was making the point that when your values are deeply rooted, then they tend to dominate more than your emotions. And I think part of the problem is that, I was mentioning, part of the problem is that we may think we value something, we don't actually value it. Like I was given the example, when couples say they fight a lot, and I say, do you like to fight? And they'll all say, no, I don't. And I'll say, well, that doesn't make sense, because if you really didn't want to fight, you wouldn't. So that means the value of not fighting is not, it's not very strong. Okay, let me put in a title here before I continue. Sorry for the, we're calling this values versus emotions. Part 2. Okay, save. All right, now we're good. So, it's my personal experience that when a value becomes extremely important to you, it starts to dominate your behavior. If it's not important, then your emotion could override proper behavior, because that way of behaving, it is so deeply conditioned and rooted within us that if we don't have a strong value against it, it can override it. And we had spoken, I'm going to go on chat, so if you have any questions or comments, just make them. We had spoken about how, I mean, obviously we all know how emotions can affect us. And my point was, when you value a certain behavior, then even though you're emotionally drawn to act in a certain way because of whatever the situation is that you're in, your values will override your emotions if your values are deeply rooted and they're very strong. And we can give some examples. Our culture, we have different cultural values depending on where we grow up. So one of the cultural values that I mentioned yesterday was the difference between the way traditional Indian families view marriage and the way marriage is being viewed in the West, and also the way it's being viewed more and more by younger Indian families. So the value in traditional Indian families is that you get married once, and that value has changed in our society in the West. So if you don't get along, then the option, which is not considered in India, or at least wasn't, the option is, the divorce would be the option, because based on how I feel, I'm not happy in this marriage. So the feeling will dominate. But let's say you have a value which is very, very strong, that you're only meant to marry once. Marriage is once, and it's for life. And that value is ingrained deeply in you. So even if sometimes you feel like you would like to divorce, you would never act on that, because the value would override it. Now, one aspect that we didn't discuss about values is that values, if they're not Krishna conscious, they'll be relative to the social environment you're raised in. So not necessarily are all values considered right or moral, but our values are getting socialized. But for the sake of this discussion, we're talking about values which are based in Vaishnava culture and Vaishnava philosophy. So that becomes the right and wrong. And when we evaluate this talk I heard by this man this morning, just a brief talk about values versus emotions, and he was making the point that I've made many times, is that in our society now, feelings have become the standard of right and wrong. How you feel about something. And he proposed a hypothetical question, which is quite interesting. He said that if you have a dog that you love very dearly, and the dog falls in a river, and there's also a man drowning in the river, and you can only save one of them, which one would you save? And they've actually done this experiment, and amongst younger people, 2/3 of them said, I love my dog, so I would save my dog. And his point was that they're acting on the basis of feeling, because out of a feeling of love, they would save the dog. Now his point was that morally, we would save the human being. We would give the human being a superior role. And even in Krishna consciousness, that's true. So that his point was the right answer is you should save the human being. But when you act on feeling, because you have no feeling for the human being, but you have love for your dog. So he was making the point that the average person is not loved by many people. You're loved by your mother, your husband, your wife, your children, your relatives, but beyond that, you're not loved by anybody. But would people save your life if they don't love you? Yes, because morally they would do the right thing. If they're acting on, if they're acting on their values, they would. But acting on emotions, according to this research, they wouldn't always. They would act according to who they love the most. Interesting, right? So my realization as I was speaking yesterday, what stuck out for me most strongly was the idea that we have values, but a lot of us are not really grounded in those values. I think sometimes we're not entirely even aware of what our values are. And by grounded, I mean they're not dominant, they're not powerful, they're not strong enough to override emotional responses to situations. So the values we would call dharma. And in the emotional response, which is against dharma, then we would call, in Krishna conscious terminology, we would call it whimsical action, an action against Shastra, an actual based on selfishness or sensual desire, or an action based on a lack of self-control. So then the idea is that dharma or value is a means by which we gain self-control. We may feel that we want to act in a certain way, but we understand what is the dharma and then we act in the proper way. And I've given this example before of Priyavrata Maharaj, it's such an amazing example. I'll give it again for those of you who forgot or haven't heard the example. Priyavrata Maharaj had decided not to marry, but he was next in line to be king, and in order to be king, he needed to marry. So he refused to be king because he didn't want to marry. And so then the Brahmins tried to convince him. I believe the Brahmins tried to convince him, and he refused. And it was so necessary for him to be the king, because no one else was qualified, that Lord Brahma had to ask. And so when Lord Brahma asked, he agreed. And then he got married, he had a family, and then his son would inherit the throne. But he had this detached mentality. So he was never really attached to his wife and his children, at least not materially attached, because he didn't want to marry in the first place. But externally, he was a very good husband and a very good father. He showed a lot of affection. So what was happening in this situation is quite interesting, and I think a little, what you could even call abnormal. It appears a little bit abnormal by our standards, in that he didn't have much affection, but he acted affectionately, which is, in other words, he wasn't acting on his detachment. The detachment was how he felt. He felt detached. That was his natural spiritual state. But the value was, now I'm a grihasta, so the value is, what makes grihasta life work is affection. So he acted affectionately. He wasn't feeling affectionately, but he was acting affectionately. Now, for us it sounds strange, because we're so used to acting based on feeling. And many times in our relationships, marital relationships or relationships between men and women, it's all based around feeling. And that's why Prabhupada said there's no love in the world, because he said you always want to get something from another person. It's always about you. What can I get from you? Or even that you make me feel good. But later on, you don't make me feel good. So when you don't make me feel good, I don't really need you anymore. So that's why Prabhupada said, I was just reading this morning, he was giving this example, And that's why he said there's no love, because as we discussed before in the classes on what is love, you can't have love if you're trying to get gratification from another person. That's not love. So, as we know, a lot of what goes on in the name of love is the feeling we get. It's this feeling I get in your presence, and that feeling is driving me, so-called, to love you and be affectionate and serve you and so on. But when that feeling's not there, then where's the drive? So we're very driven in relationships by feeling, not by the affection that comes as a result of duty. Why is the affection there? Because it's my duty as your husband or as your wife to serve you. It's my duty as your parent to take care of you. So that affection, it manifests a form which goes beyond feeling, because I may not always feel like being dutiful. But because I value duty, the value overrides the feeling. So I may feel so many things, right? So I think you understand the principle. Now you can apply that in various situations. I know that there's many young girls who often get enamored by young boys, and many young boys who become enamored by young girls. In traditional cultures, your parents would arrange your marriage. So this, even if you became enamored, your value was that I'm not going to choose my husband, but my family will choose my husband, or they'll choose my wife. So you were able to deal with that. Oh, I have this very strong feeling for this person. But the feeling wouldn't dominate, because the culture valued arranged marriages, which would be arranged by elders who understood the nature of the boy and the girl. So they would make sure that they would choose the right combination would be chosen. And so for us in the West who base relationships on feelings, that doesn't feel right, does it? Now I'm saying this and you're thinking, ooh, that's weird. Or so is it? I think for a lot of you, when I say that, it doesn't feel good. It feels bad. It feels almost like slavery. But if you're raised in that culture, it feels very good, because you don't have to find your husband or wife. She'll be found for you. And the idea is that you don't have to be in various romantic relationships and go through that whole ordeal and try to think if it feels right or not. But it's arranged. Now, if those are your values, it's very easy. And as weird as it may sound to us, if you're raised that way and that's what you value, it's quite normal. And if we talked about marriage just based on feeling or looks or love at first sight, if you have this other value, that would feel weird to you. That would seem very strange. So, in any area of your life where you feel you're having difficulty controlling your senses or controlling your emotions, look for values that would override those feelings. Like, for example, anger. What would override anger? Well, I talked about it a little bit yesterday. One of the things that would override anger is respect. I'm becoming angry at a person because I'm either judgmental, critical, sarcastic in some way. I'm not respecting them sufficiently, and I'm faulting their actions, their intelligence, their abilities, and sometimes getting frustrated with what they do, not accepting them for who they are, not respecting them for who they are, but expecting them to be perhaps on a standard like mine. And so this would be one example of how you could control anger, just by developing more respect for people, more appreciation for who they are, not for the expectation that you have of them, but just who they are as people, seeing the goodness in them. Another aspect of overcoming anger might be to value tolerance, or see the necessity of tolerance in daily activities and relationships. And as you put more emphasis on the value of tolerance, then when you're starting to become intolerant, then it will actually activate your tolerance. It will remind you that I value tolerance. And actually, we do value tolerance, and we do value respect. It's ingrained in our philosophy. But the interesting thing is that although it's ingrained in our philosophy, it's not necessarily ingrained in us as a value. Because we come to Krishna consciousness and we're conditioned by various values, and respect may not be a part of our conditioning. Maybe when we come to Krishna consciousness, we came from a wealthy background, or we're very well educated, or we're above average intelligence, or we have specific talents that are far above everyone else. And it may be very natural for us to be a bit judgmental because we're always a little bit above the crowd, so to speak. And so that's just how we've been operating. Maybe we've been operating that way for lifetimes. And so we come to Krishna consciousness, and one of the fundamental principles is that Krishna is in everyone's heart, and we respect all living entities because Krishna resides there, and we see everyone as a temple of God. So that's great in theory. But unless that becomes a value that we imbibe very strongly, we're not going to do it, even though it's in our philosophy. It's not going to manifest. It's not going to get out of our head and manifest in our behavior, so that when we start dealing with people, we deal with tremendous amount of respect. Even when we're dealing with very new devotees, we would act very respectfully. We're not expecting, well, I'm senior to you, so I expect you to behave in a certain way. We wouldn't act that way because we respect them. Now, if we don't show that kind of respect, then yes, we could be very demanding, very controlling. And when we become demanding and controlling, it's very easy to become angry with people who don't live up to our demands or live up to the needs that we feel they should live up to. Or just when we believe that material nature should be subservient to my will and desire, things should just kind of all fall into place, it can become very, very angry. So we have to look at where we're lacking, where we find in our life that we're emotionally weak or sensually weak, and start to look at what are the values that would sort of override or are antithetical to the desires that are pulling me down. We did this in our sexual purity course. And that if you want to remain sexually pure, if you want to have pure sexual feelings, there has to be an increased amount of respect for the opposite sex. Otherwise, as we all know, in our culture, we've been raised, especially men, but women also, we've been raised to see the opposite sex as an object of sexual gratification. And we see how women are used in advertising as sexual objects. And so, especially men who grow up in this culture, they can tend to have very demeaning attitudes towards women and not really value them fully as human beings. And we see throughout history women were not fully valued or not given the same rights as men in many ways. So, but they were always seen as sexual objects. So in order to become more sexually controlled, we have to change our feelings. We have to change how we feel about women. And in order to change how we feel about women, or in this case women, or in another case women about men, we have to change how we value. And so the values have to change from they're valuable as objects of my gratification, they're valuable as objects to serve me. Then we have to change that to they are mother, respectable. I must respect women as mother. I respect them as gopis, Krishna's girlfriend, Krishna's wife, Krishna's property. I see them as Krishna's property. They're not meant for me to enjoy. So if that value doesn't dominate, then it's very easily for men to become very distracted, sexually allured by women. Whereas if he sees woman as mother, as an object of service, as an honorable, put them on a higher level of respect that maybe he's doing at the present, and the same with women, then that can start to override feelings which we shouldn't have as devotees. And another thing that happens is that, as we've discussed this before, when your values and your feelings are out of alignment, you feel quite bad. And that bad feeling is actually good, because it's showing you that you're not thinking or feeling or acting or behaving according to what you believe deep down is actually right. So whenever you feel somewhat awkward about how you're thinking, how you're feeling, how you're acting, normally it's because you're out of alignment with your values. So the converse is also true, that you feel very good when you act according to your values. Now, our senses will pull us down, and there's this concept of sensual pleasure, but on the level of the heart or the level of consciousness, if you engage in something which goes against your values, even though sensually it may be gratifying or stimulating, but internally it's causing you to be, it's a kind of dissonance. It's the word I'm looking for. You're conflicted. It causes conflict internally. Because sensually it gives you pleasure, but when it goes against your values, you become conflicted and you become unhappy. And that's why so many times when we're doing something to gratify our senses and it doesn't work, and we just get frustrated, it's because what we're doing sometimes, or many times, what we're doing, it's going against what we believe. And one of the aspects that I've spoken about before of the mode of ignorance is the mode of ignorance. The pleasure and the pain, usually they come together simultaneously, whereas in passion, the pleasure comes discreetly and then the pain follows. Where in ignorance, often the very thing you're doing, you're so conflicted by doing it that it's causing you misery. For example, let's say you're a married man. I think I've given this example before, but I think it's a good one. You're a married man and you have a mistress. And so that's giving you sensual pleasure. But the time you're spending with your mistress, you should be spending at home with your wife. Or actually, you should be spending that time reading Srimad Bhagavatam, right? Maybe you think like that. I'm visiting this lady, but I could be learning shlokas. And in some way, you're going to feel conflicted. Now, what a lot of us do is we try to repress, suppress that conflict within us and just kind of pretend it's not there. But it is there. And that's one of the reasons that even though we get heightened sensual gratification, we feel a dissonance within us, out of a disalignment. Is that a word? Disalignment? Out of alignment. Unaligned. We're not aligned. And although the pleasure may be great, as intense as the pleasure is, that intense, the feeling of guilt or the feeling of remorse or depression comes. So in the mode of ignorance, it often happens simultaneously. While you're doing it, you're regretful, or you're feeling guilty, you feel it's the wrong thing. So that's another aspect of how we suffer when we are out of alignment with values. And now, another aspect which we've spoken about before. Of course, we've spoken about before. I don't know if you've all heard it, so I'm going over it again. And I think sometimes it's good to go over again, because when I spoke about it initially, you may not have gone so deeply into it. Now I forgot what I was going to say. What did we speak about before that I was going to say? Well, we spoke about the mode of ignorance being simultaneous suffering. We've spoken a lot about how happiness comes from purification of consciousness. And And we've spoken also about how when you're in sattva guna is the alignment. The sattva guna is when your actions are aligned with your values and beliefs. I forgot the other point I was going to make. It'll come back to me. Why did I forget? I'm not taking my brain medicine. That's the problem. When I was taking my brain medicine, I wasn't forgetting. Anyway, lack of sleep could be there. Could be many. Old age could be there. Yes. So, the point. Yes, now I remember. So it was only a lap of 60 seconds. I'm not doing so bad. And I made this point before, and it's very important that when we come to spiritual life, when we study Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, we listen to Srila Prabhupada's lectures, we listen to his conversations, we listen to our spiritual master's lectures, we get very clear values. These are not relative values. These are not values based on how I or you feel. These are not values based on society's moral standards. These are standards that are coming from Krishna, and we get a lot of them. There's 26 qualities of devotee. Those are 26 values, you could say. And there's many, many more. The 4 regulative principles, they're 4 values. And beyond the 26 qualities, there are other qualities which Krishna describes in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the 13th chapter of the Gita. So just by studying our philosophy, there's so many values that you'll learn about. This is how I should be. And now, the problem that comes with that, as I was saying, is that as highly conditioned as we are, even though these values sound good to us, we agree with them. I think anyone who's a devotee agrees with these values. Yes, this is good, this is right, but I'm conditioned to other values. And so when I become a devotee, it becomes obvious that there's this dissonance between what I value presently and what are the values I should be living by. And it creates a problem, because when you become a devotee, obviously there's some alignment that's not there, just naturally, because now you're given these values, they're really high. I'll get my hand in there. Let's see, let's move this. Okay, yeah, is that better? Move it some more. It's my right hand, so I have to be, yeah. So you have values that are very high, and you come like here, right? Now you're getting a new view of the room. All right. Variety is the spice of life. Okay. So for some devotees, they realize that I'm not living up to these values. It can be discouraging. It could even be depressing. Okay. So I think this is just a reality we have to deal with. That as when you take up Krishna consciousness, then you're going to learn that there's so many standards that you should be living on. So again, it goes back to my original point that when you see where you're lacking, you have to look at the values, the value or the values that are lacking, and you have to start focusing on developing them. You just have to start focusing on magnifying the importance for you individually. So you start feeling, rather than feeling, let's say, and we'll give the example, I feel angry. Very easily I become upset. But rather than feeling anger, what you want to start feeling is the value of control, as we said, the value of respect, and the value of tolerance, being able to accept things that I can't control. Those are the values that you want to start focusing on, to the point where you feel those values in a positive way. What I mean is that you feel them to such a degree that they become ways that you want to behave all the time. It comes to a level where you're overriding feelings with feelings, but you're overriding them with feelings based on value. I don't know if I told you, but I was watching a short video on self-esteem, And the speaker, it was the best, he was the best speaker and author on self-esteem that I've read so far. And I read it periodically because so many devotees that require counseling from me have self-esteem issues. And he made a very nice point, and he said, knowing and feeling are two different things. Let's say I know I should have self-confidence. I know I should have self-respect. I know I shouldn't denigrate myself. I shouldn't put myself down. But I feel differently. I feel low. I feel worthless. I feel everyone's better. Of course, you might say, hey, that's really good. That's Krishna consciousness. It is when you're Krishna conscious on a high level, but when you're beginning Krishna consciousness, that manifests as a psychological problem. So although you know you should have more confidence in yourself, you should have a higher opinion of yourself, you don't. And so until you change the feeling, the knowledge doesn't change you. So, okay, yes, I know, I read a book on self-esteem, I should feel good about myself, but I don't feel good about myself. Then he said something interesting. He said that if a person doesn't feel good about themselves and other people try to say, no, you're good, it makes it worse because it's going against what they feel. If I say you should feel good about yourself, but you don't, your feeling is I don't feel good about myself and I'm trying to perk you up, it makes you feel worse because what I'm saying is not how you feel. It's like I'm not sensitive to you or something. It doesn't go along with what you're experiencing. I'm not experiencing that I'm good, I'm experiencing that I'm bad. Stop telling me I'm good. I'm not good, I'm bad. You're agitating me by telling me I'm good. So you see, you have to get your feelings aligned with your values. So often when I'm juxtaposing values to emotions, I'm working on the premise here, a starting point, that we're acting emotionally against, not in alignment, but with conflicting with our values. But as I mentioned in the last class, it doesn't always work that way. It doesn't always have to work that way because we want to come to the point that our emotions and our values are the same. So I'm in a difficult situation, things aren't working out, but I've developed a very strong desire, which has become a feeling now, to be accepting of situations I can't control. And so when I can't control the situation, what starts dominating me is almost a need, you could say, my need to be tolerant, because it's become so grounded in me. And why and how does it become grounded? Well, because Krishna wants us to be tolerant. Krishna wants us to be accepting. Srila Prabhupada wants us to be tolerant. He wants us to be accepting. And I value those instructions, and I value my relationship with Prabhupada, so therefore being tolerant now becomes important to me. Because Mahaprabhu wants us to be tolerant. In so many ways, we're encouraged to be tolerant. We're encouraged to be forgiving. We're encouraged to be more accepting of situations. We're encouraged to be equipoised. So because we're encouraged by Krishna, by Srila Prabhupada, by Mahaprabhu, by our spiritual master, by the teachings of Shastra, if you allow yourself to be encouraged to the point where inside of you, it's not just, I know I should be tolerant, but it becomes a feeling that this is how I really want to be as a person. This is something that when I think about tolerance, it makes me feel good. This is how I want to be. And so when you're in that state, then it's very easy to be tolerant because it becomes something that's so valuable to you. You understand? So we need to get the values onto the emotional level. Like, I feel it's extremely important as a man to respect women. When it's on the level of feeling, then it dominates my relationship with women. You see? When tolerance is on the level of feeling, it's very easy to control my anger. Or you could even take it one stage above that and say, if it's very strong, you won't even become angry. because it becomes a kind of self-defense. The tolerance or forgiveness becomes what you value so much that you won't even get to the point of anger or frustration. It works amazingly well in very close relationships where you're working daily with somebody, or in marital relationships. Because if you value the relationship, if you value being a good wife or a good husband, if that's important to you, if you value kindness in a relationship, kindness is important, obviously. Forgiveness is important in a relationship. Affection is important in a relationship. If you value these things, then you're going to act affectionately, forgivingly, and so forth, even when you don't feel like it. And sometimes you won't feel like it, because when we're close with people, then often situations can become very disturbing. But you'll find the more and more you value these positive emotions and positive values, that's how you're going to treat people. And less you'll find those people disturbing you. As I've said, I think I've said before, one of the great realizations that I had in these intimate relationships, whether it's a wife or anyone, is acceptance. If you value acceptance, then the need to judge them, the need to condemn or criticize, it just goes away. Now, sometimes practically you may need to discuss things, that they're doing something that's just interfering with your practical life, or doing something that may be intolerable, like they're scratching a chalkboard. No, you don't want them to do that, right? So you may have to talk about that. But I'm talking about just them being who they are, and then we accepting, well, that's how they are. It's very powerful. It's a very powerful value to have. And when you have it and you're accepting, you don't, the things they do that would normally bother you, they don't bother you anymore. So you can see the value of that, can't you? Obviously. So the value of it is that because you embody that to such a strong degree, that now you're not dealing anymore with the things they do that disturb you. You just actually don't notice it. It's just it's part of who they are. And because you like the person, somehow or the other, you can end up liking the things you don't like. Because when you first met them, you liked the things that you later learned not to like, isn't it? And as you become more accepting, then it's just who they are. It's part of the package. So if you like the person, then somehow or other you'll accept the whole package. It's just, you like shopping at this store if the walls are pink, and you don't like pink, somehow or other you'll deal with it. You're okay with it. So I think this is the real lesson, that what we value, what we're taught to value in Krishna consciousness, we have to focus on, we have to magnify, we have to understand the importance of those values. We have to start seeing how I can integrate those values within my interactions with other people and just situations, everyday situations that I'm dealing with. We have to be clear on how those values manifest in as many varieties of situations as possible. And then most importantly, as I was saying, we really have to want to live by those values, because if we don't want it, there's no emotional bond to it. And it's very easy for our emotions to overcome us. Like often I've meditated on what anger is, and one of the things that you see anger doing is that it hurts other people. I don't know if you've ever noticed that or ever had this experience, but you can become really upset with somebody, and then you can make them feel really bad. You're just talking about how upset you are. You're putting them down. You're making them feel horrible for what they've done. You might make them feel horrible for who they are as a person. And then I realized that anger it's kind of like, it's in a sense, it's used as a form of torture, just to make somebody feel really, really bad. And I think if you meditate on it that way and you see it manifesting that way, it becomes an impetus to overcome, if you have a tendency to become angry easily, it becomes an impetus to overcome your anger when you see how much it hurts or disturbs other people. One of the things that I noticed many years ago is that if you have a close relationship with another person, respecting them, respecting their space, respecting their desires is very important. So anger is really the antithesis of respecting someone's space. You invade their space with your anger. They can't get away with it. It's just, it dominates them. And you don't want to let them loose. You just want to let them know how bad what they've done, how bad what it is they've done is, or how bad they made you feel. And you just kind of want to smash them into the ground. Now, obviously, when we're angry, we're not really consciously doing this, and we normally regret it, but nevertheless, we're doing it. And so I found it very powerful, very effective to understand what we're doing and to develop the value of respecting people, respecting their space, respecting their right to be peaceful. I mean, it's interesting when you think about it. Respecting their opinion, allowing them to make mistakes, because often when we become angry, we're not respecting their opinion, their space, we're not allowing them to make mistakes. Oftentimes we're not even allowing them to be who they are. So it's a very dominant form of control. I want you to be a certain way, isn't it? And if you're not this way, then I'm going to let you know how bad you are. So when you understand a certain emotional response you have to a situation, how it's affecting other people, if you deconstruct it and see the nature of it, how it, in this case, for example, we're talking about how much lack of respect is there, how much need for control is there, how there's even a kind of pleasure in making people feel bad. They will look at these things. They're totally coming from the mode of ignorance. Just horrible, horrible state of consciousness. We have to look at these things and say, no, I'm finished with this. I can't do this. This is not Krishna consciousness. I can't treat people this way any longer. And then by that process, developing a desire to be much more respectful, more controlled, more, I don't know, lack of a better word, easygoing, allowing people to be who they are. That's part of being accepting, not just of situations, but accepting of people. And then it's just, overall, if you wanted to compress it into one idea, it's just basic, fundamental Krishna consciousness, respecting another person, honoring another person. Like we say, we honor everyone, we allow everyone to live, we don't eat meat. Just honoring another person for who they are. Krishna gives people independence to mess things up. We can certainly honor that if that's what they want to do. Now, of course, anger does have a place in Krishna's service, in defending Krishna's devotees, in defending Krishna's movement. What I'm speaking about here is this is the general day-to-day affairs in engaging with people. Just the common ways in which we lose control where it's not valid. There's no valid Krishna conscious reason to do it. So, best thing you can do now is really look at the values that you think you require to help you. And then start thinking how you can bring those values into an emotional level. Start looking at how, if you don't act in those values, how you will act, how it will affect you, how miserable it makes you feel, how it degrades your consciousness, how it separates you from Krishna. So you have to look at the negatives, because the negatives become an impetus for the positives. So look at anything that is pulling you away from Krishna, anything and where you feel you're not controlled, how it's harming you, how being more controlled would help you, and that value that would help you. And then pray, or somehow or other develop some kind of attraction to that value. Like, I want to be this way, on the level of feeling. You feel it in your heart. This is how I want to be. A lot of times we find that people are unkind, they're critical. And as we all know, our tendency is to either defend ourselves or attack. And if you value, let's say, your own sanity, you won't do that. So sometimes it's not even a question of having the value of respect. It might just be have the value of sanity. I value sanity. So I'm not going to retaliate when someone comes at me, so to speak, hit below the belt. I'm not going to come back and hit below the belt, because that will be just a disturbance for me. So if we value our own peace of mind, the own peace of mind that we require to be Krishna conscious and to deal with others in a respectful way, then often that value can insulate us from any kind of hurt, because if people try to hurt us, we won't go there because we know it'll degrade us. And so it's okay, let them, if they need to hurt me, that's okay, let them hurt me. But my value is that I won't retaliate with the same consciousness that has come to me. I will retaliate. If I do, it's going to be from a better place. I'll retaliate with something good, like tolerance, for example. I'll understand they're having a bad day or a bad year or a bad life, but I'm not going to retaliate with the same thing, at least ideally. That's how I would respond if I value my own consciousness. Like what Chaitanya said, the heart is the cherished place. We want to keep the heart pure. So we don't want to allow contamination to come into the heart, right? Lord Chaitanya said that. He said, your heart is the sacred place, and if you allow things like envy or hatred, any of these very negative emotions, then you contaminate your heart. So if you have a value of maintaining your heart as a sacred place, as a pure place, because Mahaprabhu said, for Krishna to reside there has to be pure, like an altar, like a temple. So I think if we valued our hearts more, we would be more shanti when we're being attacked, because we wouldn't want to go to retaliate. We wouldn't want to come back with any kind of vengeance. We wouldn't want to come back with more criticism than they levied at us. You understand? So my experience teaches me that if we don't value these things, then naturally as conditioned souls, we're going to have a very difficult time. When we're hurt, we're going to hurt others. Or if we don't hurt others, we just fall apart, we break down. We allow ourselves to break down. So I believe we need to value what Krishna says as being equipoised, samata. Sama, being equal. Krishna, second chapter, goes very much into that, being equipoised. Don't get so disturbed. And we get easily disturbed. And I think it's important that we value these instructions of Krishna. He says, be equal. Learn how to be equal. Things are good, things are bad, people are nice, people aren't nice, the weather is warm, it's cold. We have to learn how to be more equipoised, right? And in order to do that, we have to value that quality within us. Krishna is asking us, don't get elated. If you win, if you lose, don't worry. If you're successful, if you fail, just keep going, remain. That's what Krishna is asking us to do. So we should value these things, shouldn't we? Because these are his instructions. And you will find the more you value them, the easier it is to follow. And you'll become less and less pushed around by your emotions, and more pushed around by Krishna's instructions. Does that make sense? So you had some comments or questions, so I'm going to look at them now. I have to come closer to you to read them. Usually what people become, when people become devotees, become more worried about the things that have a wrong behavior according with the Shastras. Yes, that was my point. Well, the point was that if you're not a devotee, you don't have standards. So it's like whatever. What are your standards? Your standards. I'm going to see if this has a function to turn light down. No. Yeah, it's a natural. I mean, you're aware of standards, so you become aware of them in other people as well as yourself. And so that's why we need to understand the values in Krishna consciousness, because it's very easy to get carried away in judging others, because there's so much to judge them by. And sometimes the devotees become judges. Yes. How can we avoid this? I think everything I'm saying here will help you avoid this. It always comes back to me, like if you say, if Eddie, you say that sometimes I do this, I judge devotees because I expect them to be in a certain standard. And how can I avoid it? Now, the thing we have to confront is that although when we come to Krishna consciousness, there are many standards by which we can judge people, that's for sure. But we have to acknowledge that we have a tendency to be judgmental. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. So we overcome it by recognizing that tendency, that I'm doing it, that maybe I'm more well-educated, so I think I'm better. I come from a better family, I think I'm better. In some way, I think I'm better. So we recognize that tendency. And we really have to develop, I would say, a repulsion for these kinds of things. At some point in our spiritual life, we have to become repulsed by these attitudes and behaviors, because they're very deeply ingrained with us. And repulsed by them, and then extremely attracted to not being judgmental, to being appreciative, to being open, to be encouraging, to be accepting. These are all the qualities that counteract being judgmental. So somehow or other, we need to become attracted to these qualities, to these values. And again, my original point was if we're overly judgmental and critical, then it has to mean that there's some attraction to acting that way. It's just that we're not valuing enough other behavior. It just has to be like that. So meditate on that. I stand by that. Like I said earlier, couples say, we're fighting, and I say, do you like to fight? And they say, no. And I say, I don't believe you. Because people who don't like to do something don't do it. I mean, at least theoretically, do you like chocolate ice cream? No, I don't. Do you eat chocolate ice cream? Yeah, I eat it every day. That doesn't make sense, does it? Do you like to fight? No, I don't. Do you fight? Yes, we fight every day. But I don't like it. No, I think we have to acknowledge that we do like. Do you judge people? Yes. Do you like judging them? No. Why do you say no? What you're really saying is it doesn't feel good to do it. But I would say, but you like doing it. It just doesn't feel good. And that's why you say, no, I don't like it. You like it, because if you didn't, you would stop it. So we have to confront that reality. I have a desire. I get something out of being judgmental. I get something out of being critical, and that's why I do it. Every action has a payoff. We don't just do things for no reason. So we acknowledge that. And then we can now confront how to deal with it, acknowledging that I actually do it because I'm getting something from it. My ego gets puffed up when I'm judgmental. Just like in our Course on Humility, one of the things that I realized is that the Course on Humility is meant to help devotees develop an attraction to be humble, because very few of us really are attracted to being humble. It's not alluring. Humility is, we tend to think if I'm humble, then I'm a loser. I'll lose out. I won't benefit from it. I'll be taken advantage of. I'll be on the bottom of the pile, or whatever. We feel it's kind of a weakness, or it's not an advantageous position to be in. And so until we develop a desire to be humble, until we see the value of humility, and until we see how being proud is detrimental to our bhakti in very detailed ways. We won't develop this desire to be humble, and then we'll act in ways which exhibit our pride, and I'll say, do you like being proud? And you'll say, no, I don't, but that's how I act. And then I'll say, I don't believe you, because if you didn't, you wouldn't. That's the ultimate bottom line. If I didn't, I wouldn't. I think we have to accept that. And let's work through our conditioned behavior so we can dissect this mentality, whatever mentality it is I have that I don't want. Dissect it, see how it's destructive. Look at the opposite, see how the opposite is really what I would like to achieve. Develop a strong desire to be that way. Stronger than the desire to be critical, I have to develop the desire to be accepting. Stronger than the desire to be judgmental, I have to develop the desire to be appreciative. Stronger than the desire for envy, I have to develop the desire to serve this person. So we just have to be honest about it. So, holier than thou attitude is very scary and easy to get into, yes. Yeah. I mean, really what it boils down to is that anything that's not working for you in your life, anything that's negative, having a negative influence, you have to deal with it. You have to face it. And you have to want to become something better than that. I think a lot of us are satisfied with okay. Or I think a lot of us are satisfied with our own conditioning. And when I say acceptance, yes, you can accept your own conditioning, but don't accept to stay there. Okay, I may be easily disturbed or easily upset by things, but I don't want to stay there. I don't want to be okay with that. So when you become okay with not being to the standard, then that's a problem. So, acknowledge where you need to grow, acknowledge your weaknesses, and then start looking at the proper consciousness. What is the proper consciousness? That would help me overcome that. That's the whole idea. Does that make sense? Ladies and gentlemen, do you have any children with us? Ladies, gentlemen, children. I wish I would have known all this when I was 15 years old. I'd probably been the President of the United States by the time I was 25. Yes, brought about world peace by the time I was 30. Unfortunately, we don't learn these things. Often, we never learn these things. And you have a lot of people who are not controlled. And even amongst our devotees, a lot of devotees given to their conditioned nature, feeling that they can't control it, when a lot of the problem is just that they haven't imbibed Krishna conscious values strongly enough in their life and kind of accepted their conditioning to dominate. And it's very unfortunate to see, because we have the solutions, we have a philosophy, we have a practice, we have the holy name, we have the remedy to the problem. And when we don't use it, it's just very unfortunate. Okay, so I think we've gone an hour. Is that okay? I'm going to interfaith, I guess, kind of a festival tonight. We're going to do kirtan, so we're going to leave in an hour. And I think I should eat something, so I will bid you farewell. I recommend that you listen to these classes again. They can be very helpful. When I'm speaking this way, it's not in a seminar format, so kind of brush over things you may not fully pick up. I try to repeat myself. I think it's necessary. But still, I think hearing again would be very good. Okay? So, tomorrow is Monday, and we're going to have a class on what is love. I think it'll be like the 6th in the series, 6th or 7th. That will be at 12:15 Berlin time, which means it's 2 hours, I believe it's 2 hours and 15 minutes earlier than class started today. Is that correct? Class started today at 2:30. So, yeah, no, it's 2 hours, excuse me. Yeah, so if you would, yeah, so it's 2 hours and 15 minutes earlier than class today. Okay, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Go Premanandi, Hari Hari Bol.